Hi, Rose. So nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I think it's probably been a year now since you started at Nextdoor, and I remember chatting to you about it when you first got there, and you said that it was created in response to the idea that people have felt more isolated, more lonely than ever, despite being more connected than ever. And that was like, I guess, over 10 years ago. I mean, I think we found that this year that's really kind of been brought into stark relief. There's been a much more renewed importance in community, of neighborhoods, of going local. So in the, I guess, 9 months that you've been there, tell us what you've witnessed on the platform. How, what's happening on the platform? How are people acting on the platform? Has that changed? And how has Nextdoor specifically responded to the needs of today?
Yeah, I mean, I joined February 3rd, so a couple weeks before COVID came into full relief. And what immediately happened was we needed to make sure we were giving neighbors trusted information. So we turned to the CDC, the World Health Organization, the NHS to make sure that we were actually getting people the information that was critical to them. And then the most amazing thing that happened, which is that humanity actually kicked in, right? People began to offer to help each other. So we saw a 262% increase in terms of the conversations of people offering to help. So I know I live in Chelsea, New York, and so I quickly created a group because the product team quickly moved up a product that was supposed to be happening a few months later, which was a group functionality to enable you to create a group so that it was easier to actually find each other. So I created a group called Neighbors Helping Neighbors in my own local community as a way for us to be able to help each other. And so you could post in there and say, I need help, or I'm here to offer help. And people were offering to run groceries or pick up pharmaceutical items for people who were immunocompromised. And that was kind of an amazing thing to witness. And then pretty quickly, people turned to helping their local businesses because we quickly realized by the third or fourth week that it wasn't just a personal thing. It was actually going to be really difficult for our local businesses. And we all know that our neighborhoods are composed of not just, Nathaniel and Troy who live down the street from me, but also Stefan from the French bakery or, Joe's coffee shop. So the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I remember being on Nextdoor myself and going there to kind of find out who was like delivering curbside, those kind of things that, I'd never really thought about using the platform that way before. Why do you think Nextdoor is particularly suited to this moment, Maryam?
Well, I mean, look, the cornerstone of Nextdoor is proximity. It actually connects you to those closest to you. And I would say trust, right? To get onto Nextdoor, it's not as simple as clicking a button. You actually have to be verified. So you know that the person, in fact, lives where they say they do, which I think is one of the reasons people move into a new neighborhood and will trust somebody they don't know for babysitting services. There's nothing more sacred than your child. And so if you're willing to trust a stranger to babysit for you, you sure want to know that they are where they say they are and they are who they say they are, right? So trust and then proximity, because your first line of defense was really those closest to you. And so the way to find them was really most efficiently on Nextdoor.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that basically you come for the utility and you stay for the community and Nextdoor. I've also heard people talk about the notion of belonging, and that's why Nextdoor is so compelling. But I think it's probably more than that.
I think when people think community, they've always thought about belonging as what draws people in. We actually did some research early on in the year, and it ended up completing sort of in the May timeframe, so after COVID had hit. And one of the things that was interesting to hear is that I'm not looking for you to tell me I belong. What I'm looking for from my neighbors is really to be able to plug in, right? To be able to actually plug into the ecosystem of the neighborhood and access whatever it is that I need, whether that's knowing when something's open curbside or being able to ask for help. Or to find a jogging group, right? And so maybe if in the process of joining a jogging group, because I need to find somebody to run with in my immediate vicinity, I make a friend, that's great. But really, people don't say, at least when you do research, that they want to come in to find a friend. What they're looking for is the ability to be able to plug into that neighborhood ecosystem.
Yeah. And again, Nextdoor is a community platform. And I've, again, heard people say that we should think of it as a community platform and not as a social platform. Can you talk more about that? What makes Nextdoor different from many other social platforms that we can all tap into?
Yeah, Nextdoor is a community platform and not a freedom of speech platform. So we have community guidelines. In fact, we actually had a pledge that we put back up for you to sign up so that it was clear, because we always had community guidelines, that you're actually agreeing to behave a certain way to be part of that community. That is different than some other platforms where it's more of a freedom of speech platform. And so, it's like anything. You join a community and there are clear guidelines for the expectations for how you will act as a member of that community. And that's something that we take pretty seriously. Now, remember, this company was started community up. And I think that was a critical piece of the equation because neighbors really created sort of the first ecosystem. And so that's another reason we actually have moderation that happens from the community level because, I know in Chelsea, we actually think profanity is a different thing than maybe somebody does in a suburb of Arizona, right? I was watching, we were actually having a debate about moderation the other day and they were showing us some examples. So one of our guidelines is no profanity. Now, somebody might think, a shitty behavior is considered profanity in certain neighborhoods, which apparently somebody does. In New York, we consider that a term of endearment. So, having that local lens is actually a critical part of Nextdoor.
Yeah. I mean, look, neighborhoods are not all sunshine and light. I know that mine's certainly not. And I think one of the founders described, anything that happens in the real world is going to happen in our communities. And I think we saw that play out. So COVID happened. I think everyone was rallying around the community and helping out. And then the murder of George Floyd happened, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the spotlight really fell on some of the, I guess, less noble sentiments being expressed or removed from the platform. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened and how Nextdoor responded to that moment?
Well, first of all, I want to start by saying that we feel like there is unequivocally no place for racism on the platform, right? Again, we go back to us being a community platform and things that we consider unequivocal. That would be one of them, right? If you want to be part of our community, that's something that you need to understand. But let's just go back to that moment. What ended up happening is that our guidelines were not as clear as they should have been. In fact, I think it was a learning moment for all of us. On the guidelines for Nextdoor, it basically says that you can talk about local politics in the main feed and not national politics. So when the Black Lives Matter, when George Floyd was murdered, that conversation started on the platform. And so some people interpreted that to be a national conversation and not a local conversation. And so they actually removed some posts according to the guidelines, right? And I think our mistake was not stepping in the moment that we actually made it clear that we were taking a stand on the fact that no racism was allowed on the platform. We really should have turned to the guidelines and reflected that in that moment. I think it was quite clear pretty quickly that it wasn't a national conversation. It quickly became a local conversation, right? Because people were actually acting locally in response to that. The other thing is some of the posts were taken down because after a while, the thread would turn uncivil, right? And so one of the things we also are conscious of is a moment at which you have to break that down sort of because it's no longer a productive conversation. I think it was a really important moment, right, for us all to reflect on how we could be better. And I think, we turned not just to actually make a statement, which we made publicly, but honestly, that was the beginning moment for us. I think we really turned to sort of look inward and think about how in that moment we could be better. And I'm incredibly proud of how we reacted as a company. We made significant commitments, and many of that is actually coming to bear. But by the way, it's an ongoing journey, right? We committed to having more diversity on our board in terms of race, right? And we just announced both John Hope Bryan and Andrew Wisham joining, 2 new board members who also happen to be incredible executives, but also happen to be Black, right? But just re-looking at all our things, guidelines, looking at how our neighborhoods are made up. We made a commitment to try and have a more welcoming platform where more people of diverse backgrounds want to join the platform. Now, it's not a quick fix, but it's something we're very much committed to. And frankly, it's a topic we've been working on for a long time, since 2015 with Jennifer Eberhardt and the Spark team at Stanford, because it's something we think is critical, right? We want to make sure that we're we all want the kind of neighborhoods we want to live in. And by the way, I think in the same way, one of the things that is special about Nextdoor is that you don't actually pick your echo chamber. You get connected to those closest to you. And by the way, my husband said, after, a couple months of being on Nextdoor, he said, I didn't know conservatives lived in Chelsea, which I think is so funny. It just tells you who he engages with on a regular basis. But that's really an opportunity, right? The opportunity is in seeing other people and finding a way to actually engage and seeing the humanity in each other and really finding a pathway forward together.
I mean, Sarah Fryer, who's the CEO, she totally believes that, right? She believes that Nextdoor can be a safe place to have a more divisive conversation because it's your neighbor, because you can see them. It's a place where she's hoping there can be a return to a more civil discourse, which we're sorely missing, certainly here in the US, and I think probably worldwide. How is Nextdoor enabling that more civil discourse?
Well, I mean, I think Sarah believes that because she comes from Ireland, right? So she sort of experienced that personally. And I think we see that, quite frankly. We see that in San Diego, where somebody starts a conversation, it turns difficult, and then they actually are able to sort of see each other. Oftentimes they actually meet in person, and that conversation sort of changes the neighborhood, right? So I think we've actually seen that. That's really what gives me hope, not just for Nextdoor, but for the US and frankly for the world in general, because I think that is the pathway forward. We're doing more things. One of the things we kicked off in September was sort of these neighborhood conversations, sort of conversations where we bring people together. We actually did a partnership with 11 Alive to bring some people together in Atlanta to be able to have some of these difficult conversations. I think we all recognize that the path forward is through and not around. So we actually have to come to the table and find ways to do that. And we're very much committed to that, and we're going to be continuing to do that.
So we're in December. We're still in the long middle. COVID is very much a reality still in our lives. How else do you see Nextdoor helping as the neighborhood becomes more central to our lives?
Well, so it is true. We've also seen a lot of conversation on the platform of people moving. I think, and interestingly enough, I hear from friends, right, who move and actually join Nextdoor in a new community. And there is no better way to plug in and find out what's going on in the new neighborhood that you move into than Nextdoor, right? I actually had a friend who was telling me when she took the job as CMO of Taco Bell, Marissa, she moved to Newport Beach with her kids. And one of the first things she did is she posted that they had moved and that her kids were going to be starting middle school. And somebody posted and said, oh, you know what, your daughter's going to go to school with my daughter. We're having a birthday party. Why don't you guys come so that your daughter gets to meet some people, right? So just that moment of humanity, or moving into a new neighborhood and saying like, I need a plumber, right? You actually need the people closest to you who can tell you where to find resources. So it goes back to, you come in for the utility, and there's incredible utility to knowing new things about a place that you move to, and who better than your neighbors to tell you about that.
And local businesses really rely on Nextdoor, don't they, to kind of connect with the neighborhood and their neighbors. And like, what else are you doing on the platform to help them? Because a lot of them are struggling.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things that's different about Nextdoor is that when, as a local business, you join and you post, you don't have to build a followership, right? You get instant distribution to those that are closest to you, who can, in fact, use your services and can help you. And I think that instant distribution is a critical point of difference. We've also now enabled businesses to be able to not only post into the neighborhood, but engage in conversations with their neighbors. So again, I go back to sort of the moment where we needed to know whether Harmon's had Lysol wipes, right? The moment where people were going out of their homes surgically. So being able to actually have conversation and build relationship is something that small businesses in particular are all about. And so now that's something that we enable on the platform that makes it much easier for you to be in touch with your most valuable customers, those that are closest to you. And I think the other thing we did was, we enabled people to do GoFundMe campaigns. We enabled people to do, let people know about takeout and gift cards, right? All kinds of ways that businesses were innovating to try and survive. And I, noticed the other day, Paws, the local pet shop, is actually having difficulty. And so I took a picture of the sign where they were talking about that and posted on Nextdoor, and somebody was like, we should start a GoFundMe for them, right? That kind of enablement to actually step in. Another one was when somebody was actually supporting Murray's Bagels by suggesting to neighbors that we buy bagels so that then they could actually send it to the essential workers, right? That kind of humanity isn't just about us as neighbors, but also our local businesses.
So it's been almost 9 months. It's been almost a year actually since you joined Nextdoor. What are you looking forward to in the next year?
Oh, I mean, I think it's just the beginning. Look, I think Vivek Murthy, who was a former Surgeon General, talks about loneliness and its impact being equal to 15 cigarettes a day, right? I think we're not coming out of COVID tomorrow. It may be a while, but I think what I look forward to is really the change behavior of us being more connected to those who live closest to us. That notion that we're going to come out, we see neighbors. People say to me, I haven't seen you for months. So that's because I used to actually just be on a plane. Right now you're seeing me in my community in a much different way. And I think that notion of being connected, it's almost like a tribe, right? Tribes used to be defined by geography. And we are now much more tribal because we're not leaving our neighborhoods in the way that we did. So I'm becoming much more connected to those near me. And I think figuring out how to find that pathway forward, how to really enable us to help and act to help our neighborhoods, all of which are going to need it, whether it's the neighbors or the local businesses. I think that's really what I look forward to, like that innovation that's going to come with us all pulling together. And we're really an enabler to help you do that, right? Because we enable you with tools, but in the end, it's about you. And I think, also finding ways for people to still meet up in person. I definitely see that. Like I just did a meetup in my own neighborhood. People have been stuck at home. Joan hasn't left her apartment since February. So whether it's calling her to check on her or agreeing to meet in a socially distant way, we need each other, right? That's what we all know. And by the way, that's come into full relief. And I think that's what I look forward to.
Well, it's been great chatting with you, Maryam. It's good to see you. Hope to see you again soon. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to when we all gather again in person together.
Yeah, me too.